Welcome to the third webinar in our Survive, Adapt, Thrive program in conjunction with WR, Whittingham Riddell. This is a re-recording of the webinar run on the 21st of May. Apologies, it's not the live version. We had some technical issues which meant we lost our recording, but we're going to rerun it now just so you can catch up for those that missed the webinar, for those that want to re-review the session. Okay, as we said, this is the Thrive webinar, the Survive, Adapt, Thrive program. And again, for those that are registered on the program, we've shared with you the Survive, Adapt, Thrive Business Leader Roadmap, which I think is another good tool just to kind of review some of the things you should be thinking about as you move through this journey and out through the other side, hopefully positively through COVID-19. So for today's webinar, the roadmap is couple of things really, thinking about how we're going to get back to strategy. So how can we start to move away from the firefighting and the short-term challenges that we have and start to align that effort back into our core strategy. Then we're going to talk about leading change, which I think is a challenge for us in normal times, but I think for a lot of us is going to be a much bigger requirement as we adapt and pivot into what is the new normal, and then we'll have a quick chat at the end about what comes next and what we can do post this program. Okay, so with that, we'll get started. So as we said, we want to start by talking about how we get back to strategy. We talked in webinar 2 about that for many of us, the summit probably hasn't changed in terms of where we want to get to for our businesses and personally, but probably the path has. So we need to not abandon our strategies, but maybe just think about how we adapt those, bearing in mind the avalanche that hit us of COVID-19. So I think strategy for many people, it can become a bit of a confusing subject, and there's lots of I think misleading guidance out there. So I thought what I'd start by doing is just sharing with you a bit of a framework in terms of trying to sort of get some clarity on kind of what strategy really means and the different levels of strategy that exist. And we kind of use this model in terms of from the top down, that it's really important that before anything else, we really think about, what is our overarching strategic direction? Who are we? Where are we going? What's our purpose? Who are our clients? What are the key strategic aims and roadmap that we need to follow? I think it's only when we kind of got some clarity around that we can then develop that into a much more detailed go-to-market strategy and really understand our market and the customers that we want to serve and the value propositions we're going to deliver to them and the channels that we're going to use to reach them. And then once we have that clear, I think then we get into the delivery strategies where it's, how we're going to deliver sales, service, and operations to deliver on that go-to-market strategy. And then things like people, finance, compliance, and innovation, really our strategies to enable those things to happen. And I think the problem that people have is they start somewhere in the middle or they're even at the bottom. But really, we get asked to sell strategy, and it's really hard to do a sales strategy if we don't have overarching direction or go-to-market strategy in place first. So try and get the order of things, and I think also try separate these things out. I think what you'll also find as well as you move down the model is that it's less about the leadership team at the top and becomes more about the people at the bottom. I would suggest that some of your lower level leaders and team should be actually developing those strategic plans underneath your overarching direction. And probably just the one thing I wanted to touch on was around the innovation. I think innovation, there tends to be two camps with innovation. We tend to either be people or businesses that have loads of ideas and just continually bomb them into the business and often unhinge the current strategy, or we're devoid of ideas at all. So we have no innovation and no new thinking. I think both of those are dangerous. So my advice would be, if you're one of those people or businesses with lots of new ideas, don't turn them off, but control them. So when they come, assess them properly and ask yourself, are they really worth doing? And if they are, how do they enhance and accelerate our current strategy? And then more importantly, how do we integrate them and not derail the current progress? And obviously, if you're a business that doesn't have too many ideas, you probably need to start thinking of some, because at some point your model will run out. And I suppose the whole thing with the whole strategic planning process is it works on that assumption that you have a business model that is first and foremost sustainable and hopefully scalable if you want to grow. Because if you haven't, then any strategy probably isn't going to get you very far. So I think it's really important that any strategy, however simple or complex, its foundation should sit around this model of what we call now, where, how. So um, it's really important that we use the time to think, where are we today, and get real clarity on that, and then take some time to really think about where we want to be. And that's obviously where the direction comes in, and so we can truly understand that gap. I think people get really quickly into how can we do stuff without working that out and not having a clear direction, and massively underestimate the gap. So they either underestimate it, and find that it's too much of a stretch, and then you get massive demotivation, um, or the other, and they basically find that they've not been ambitious enough with where they want to go. And I think once you've got that clarity of where you are now and where you want to get to and what the gap is, it's much easier then to build, the how and the implementation of how you're going to get there. So really try and get that clarity followed by direction, and then work on implementation. And if you do that, you'll often get a good outcome. I think it's important as well when we talk about strategic direction in particular that if you're a more high level leader, or, or leading a slightly bigger business, that often it's not about having all the answers. So just expanding that now way how thinking, as we said, your job is to give the clarity, and then the focus towards where we want to be in the future. But often that where we want to be is no more than intent. So it just gives people that kind of that picture of what we intend to be. And all we need to do then is just give them a bit of a high level roadmap. People tend to need a bit of a picture of where we're going, hence why we have visions, and then just the stepping stones to get there. But then when it gets to the how, often it's not for you to have all the answers, but really just to empower and enable your people, um, to develop the answers to how we achieve that, and to come up with the plans to do so. And obviously then our other job there is also to help manage the change that we need to go through to evolve into what we're trying to evolve into. And we'll touch on change a bit later in this webinar. I think there's also a word of warning, when we're developing strategy, that that now, where, how, which is all about developing strategies for the longer term, is kind of what the job of leadership is, and for owners and directors to work on that to create value. But I recognise we all in our businesses have short-term challenges, and more so now than ever. So we have key issues now that we're looking to find solutions to implement so we can overcome those challenges. And I think in an ideal world, that stuff should be pushed to management and project teams and delegated out wherever possible. But I think the real message here is that no successful business can work without working both sides of this. And I think what people again tend to do is they drift one or the other. They get really obsessed with their strategy and kind of drop the ball on the day to day now, or they're just too busy to work on their business for the longer term. And good leaders and good businesses recognize you have to do both. And obviously, the more you can get your teams delivering that left hand side, the more as a leader you can work on the right hand side. So if you're going to go on a journey now of doing some work on this strategy, I thought what I'd do is just sort of share our process that's kind of evolved probably over 20 years now of really delivering on strategic projects for clients, and kind of in these four core areas of engagement, development, alignment, and implementation. So what we've learned is it's really important to take some time up front to re-engage the stakeholders that are going to be involved in building the strategy. Understanding their aspirations personally, understanding what the elephants in the room are for them, what they expect from the process. So we've got real good understanding and buy-in before we start. And sometimes that does lead into some quite deep scope, although it doesn't always have to be so. When we get into the development phase, this is where typically where you're building your strategy, the classic strategy day type stuff. But I think we get lots of questions about what's the right amount of time, half a day, 2 days, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the real key here is not about that. It's more about understanding you need to take some time to build your strategy, but then not assume you can do it in one sitting. You need to break and take time to percolate over days or weeks, not too long, probably not more than 2 or 3 weeks, so people can come back and kind of reflect, having reflected on what we've said in the first session, and then refine and reset, and then kind of sign off on what the strategy is going to look like. But that percolation has probably been a key learning for us over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly. I think then once you have a strategy, you are going to need your teams to help you deliver it. So this alignment piece, which we call Basecamp, is really critical. So how do you bring in your key people, or even all your people, into some kind of process where you kind of not only help them understand the strategy, but get them aligned to it and bought into it and owning it to move it into the business. And then obviously there needs to be implementation, which obviously for us is kind of where we work in coaching and driving programs with clients. But you do need to ask yourself, what are we going to do to ensure we implement? What's going to be our discipline to action? To meet in rhythm and rigor, accountability, etc. And as part of implementation, I think there's always a need to stop and kind of reset and refine before you go again, certainly at least once a year. Um, because unless you've got billions of pounds to spend on market research, strategy isn't a perfect science. You're going to make some assumptions about, what you're going to do, but you're going to learn as you go. So it's kind of a bit like a recipe. It's going to get handed down the generations from year to year, and it's going to get refined and improved over time. So it's really important to kind of reflect and reset, probably on a yearly basis. Okay, so as we try to do through this whole program, is try and give you some kind of practical tools that you can use and go back to your organisations with. So probably the most common thing that we see as we go out and talk about strategy is the SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats analysis. And I think people that know me, it's kind of one of the things that I dislike the most, and mainly because I think I see it everywhere I go, and I sit down and listen to people's lists of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But very quickly the conversation for me turns into, so what? So kind of what are you doing as a consequence of that? And often that they don't move beyond kind of a list. So I've got for you as a tool which we actually call the strategic SWOT, which I think is a SWOT analysis that actually will be beneficial to you. So how the strategic SWOT works is, there is a need to kind of agree what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. But the key then is to ask yourself, what are we going to do with these things? If we take our strengths, how are we going to use the opportunities to commercialize those strengths? When we think about our weaknesses, how do we make sure that they don't stop us realizing our opportunities? When we think about our threats, how do we use our strengths to overcome those threats? In a worst case scenario, if weaknesses and threats combine, how are we going to take corrective action? So with the handout that we provided, take some time to do a traditional kind of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats list. But the key, I think, to make this a useful tool is really challenge yourself to ideally get this down to about 4 of each, 5 max, because then you really focus on the big things, which I think is really important. And when you start to really compare and analyze against the big things, is when you get some powerful outcomes. So and what I've put on this slide for you is once you've got your 4, 5 max strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, take those and actually then start to ask yourself, these 4 questions. So how can I use these strengths to commercialize these opportunities? What do I do to make sure these weaknesses don't spoil these opportunities? How do I use these strengths to overcome these threats? And what if these weaknesses combine with these threats? What corrective action will I need to take? So that's a really powerful way to say really focus on the biggest things and questions that really challenge what you're going to do and action you're going to take. So from that, you should get some really good positive actions that, if nothing else, you do this and maybe just select the top 3 things from your action list will give you a really positive strategic way forward. Okay, so now we want to move on to leading change, which I think is going to be a big challenge for us as we move into the coming months. So we use this slide, I think, just to sort of, I think, understand kind of what it kind of looks like for us when we talk about change. Now, if we ask our people who wants to change, we get a pretty positive response. Most people want things to be better, different, and are pretty positive when you ask that question. When you start to ask people if who wants to change, in themselves, I think it starts to become a bit more of a tumbleweed moment. And certainly when we ask who wants to lead the change, you'll probably find you're the only man left in the room. But I think there's a myth here that we need to bust, which is that we kind of manifest this thinking into that people don't like change, which psychologically isn't true. What we actually have is that people don't mind change, but I think that the pace at which they are prepared to change and how comfortable they become with change are kind of the key differences between most people and us as leaders. So what we need to ask ourselves is that because of our psychological makeup, we're pretty comfortable with the change we want to make happen, and as a consequence, move quite quickly towards it. But most people need more time to get used to that or to be comfortable with it. And the key factor there is linked to whether they feel safe and secure in doing so. So if we do want to move people as leaders, I think we have some recognition that people are slower than us and need to feel safe before they do so. But if the quicker we can make them feel safe and secure in the change, then the quicker we'll move them as well. So I think just a bit of a myth busting and change of mindset in terms of where people are with change. So I think one of the problems we have with change is that there's never been until recently, with some work that we've been doing, which we're going to share with you shortly, a statistically proven change success model. So for all the books and models that exist in the world, there's nothing that's statistically proven. But I said about 10 years ago, we started a journey where we changed all of that, and that's what we're going to share with you today. So the problem with change is that, over many years now, for as long as I can remember, whichever report you look at, whether it's come from McKinsey or Harvard or many other institutions that have spent, small fortunes on assessing what the rate of change success is, pretty much always you get this outcome that 70% of business initiatives, large and small, typically tend to fail, and only 30% succeed, which is a pretty poor rate. I think on top of that, though, I think for the work we've done is what we've also learned is that the 30% of successes typically were failures as well. So how it's tended to work in change up till now is that we go on, we try an initiative, it doesn't quite succeed, and then we either give up, or if we try, we might be persistent and try again, and eventually we'll kind of get it right through persistence and numerous attempts. So what that means is of course, is that even the 30% of successes come at a huge cost, both commercially and emotionally for human beings. So I think this is where, again, a lot of the myth that people don't like change. I think people, again, don't mind change, but I think the exhaustion and the fatigue towards it are huge. And I think that drives a lot of people's thinking towards change. So I suppose at this point, I need to introduce Dr. Chris Mason. So Dr. Chris Mason is the leader of our global community who did the work on the new change model that we're going to look at in a second. And I think, as well as that 70-30 outcome that has been prevalent for as long as we can remember, there was also a piece of research done about 10 years ago now, which looked at, I think it was 12 years ago now, actually, 2008, that how recent was the most original piece of management theory. And the outcome of that global survey was it was nearly 50 years old. So Chris had a perfect storm, but not in a good way at the time, where he actually had a friend that unsuccessfully managed to save his business, and a very long story short, actually killed himself. But so Chris is sitting there with a dead friend, with these poor results of 70-30 in terms of change initiatives being successful, although even the 30 were coming at a price. And we're using the same old tools to get the same old bad results. So that kind of spurred Chris to sort of go away and actually do a PhD in psychological change, which became the first statistically proven change success model in the world ever. And this model has also been tested in the field now for probably the best part of 7 or 8 years. So what we've actually got is a model that we're going to share with you shortly, which has got now statistics that back it up to 88% success rate with no failure to get there if you follow it correctly, versus this 30% which comes with huge failure. Just before we share the model, I think it's just one other thing I think worth considering around change as well, which is this kind of notion of how transformational leadership versus transactional leadership impacts on change. So probably just worth explaining for those that have not kind of addressed this thinking before, that transformational leaders tend to be the leaders that are very visionary and forward thinking and very, driving their people to sort of to bigger and better things, quite entrepreneurial in some ways. Whereas transactional leaders tend to be the people that are almost leading the management, so making sure we do the things that we do today well. So really important to understand that both of these forms of leadership are critical for a successful business. You need a balance of both. Kind of one without the other usually falls over at some point. But what we absolutely know is that if you need change, that a dominance of transformational leadership is critical. So a dominance of transactional leadership, when you need to change and evolve, will probably hinder you. So if you are a more we all typically tend to be more dominant in one. So if you are a transactional leader, asking yourself how you can find more transformational leadership from those around you to make sure that you don't get lost in the day-to-day now, is probably a really critical question to ask yourself. Okay, so in terms of the model, let's look at the model now. So what we've learned from developing this model is that there are three core elements to driving change success. The beliefs is the kind of the what I'd call the psychological stuff, which is typically where change theory in the past has focused. So, kind of, have we got the hearts and minds of people on board to change? But the other components, capability, which is actually 40% of the change success, to actually, have we got the capability as people and as organization to change the things that have typically not been talked about much in the past? As readiness, are we actually ready to make that change? Is another area where typically wasn't thought about. So, yeah, it's 30% of the change. So we typically in the past kind of just assumed we're capable and assumed we're ready when we go. And what we need to do is get the hearts and minds of people on board. But I don't think it's any consequence that that's only 30%, and typically we only get 30% success rate. So I've given you a handout on the whole model, which has 10 levers for change around these three core areas, and you can use this handout as a bit of a diagnostic. I just want to quickly just explain what the levers mean. So in the readiness area, the 5 levers there, first of all, leadership support. So you have to think about the change in the initiative you're thinking about, and you have to think about all of the people that will be impacted or you'll need to move with this change to get context. But people will ask themselves, if I if I move with this change, do we have the support of the leadership, both emotionally and physically? And if they feel not or not enough, then they typically will resist the change. People will also ask themselves, you know, do I believe in the need for this change? So if we haven't solved the need for the change well enough, people will typically resist the change. WIIFM is what's in it for me. So people will ask themselves either consciously or subconsciously, what's in it for me if I make this change? So this is a really important lever because it's not only the biggest lever in terms of its impact, but it also you can have a group of people where they can all have very different what's in it for me. I think typically we tend to, as leaders, sell kind of one reason why we should do this. Yet, in 10, 20, 30 people, you can have several different reasons why it's good for them. And you can even have, groups of people in an initiative where actually there's nothing in it for them. We've had examples where we've kind of uncovered that and actually taken a decision to go to that group of people individually and say, look, there's nothing in it for you, but we need to do this, and will you support us? Because you can't make something up that isn't there. In terms of the change process, people typically, a bit like with strategy, they want a roadmap. So they will ask, you know, can I see, or do I believe in the process we have for to go through this change? If people can't see that, then they typically resist the change. And then the final one in readiness is confidence, which is typically about your history. So if as an organization you've got a history of coming up with new initiatives and then kind of giving up and not bothering and letting them wane, people will tend to sort of resist the change because it will just be almost like an attitude of, well, don't worry about it, they'll get fed up with this in a couple of weeks and we can move on to something else. So that's where the confidence comes. When you move into capability, that's kind of split between personal and organizational. So what people do on an individual level is they will first of all ask themselves, do I even feel capable doing what I'm doing today? Because if not, they tend not to move. But they'll also then ask themselves, do I think I'll be capable doing the thing you want me to do? And if they don't, then they'll resist the change. What people tend to do as well is they do the same thing, but about the organization. So, do I think as an organization we even deliver on what we do today? Because if I don't, I'm not thinking about anything else. But do I think if moving to this new world, we'll still be able to deliver on what you want us to do? And again, if I don't think we can, I'll tend to resist the change. Around the personal one, particularly, there can be a lot about just helping people with confidence or training them, developing them. Organizational stuff can be just about some transparency around being honest about where we've been in the past, but trying to convince people that it's different now moving forward. And just moving to those beliefs, so kind of this is, like I said, the psychological stuff. People will ask themselves based on perceived difficulty. So the more difficult it is, the more people will resist it because they just don't believe in it. People's attitude, whether positive or negative. So the more positive they are to the change, the less likely they are to resist. And the significant others is what we tend to do as human beings is, often subconsciously again ask, if I was to make this change, would the people that report to me think well of me? Because if not, then I'll tend to resist the change. So if my significant others are my friends down the pub, and I went into the pub and said, we're doing this at work now, if I thought they were going to think I was, crazy and ridicule me, then I would be resisting this change. Again, a bit like what's in it for me, a tricky one because many people can have different significant others, so that's a tough one for leaders to manage. Probably just worth just mentioned on the attitude as well that it tends to be this, again, a bit of a myth that if we get the people with the worst attitude, the biggest dissenters, to kind of to come and move with us with the change first, then we can get everyone else to follow. The truth is, it's the opposite. So what you need to focus on is the people that are very positive about the change, and get as many of those over the line as possible. Because once you get to about 30% of people on board, you tend to get a tipping point of everyone following. So that's what you want to aim for. Get as many people over the line and on board as quickly as possible, because then everyone else will follow, and then dissenters have no choice but to follow or be ostracized and away from the rest of the business. Okay, so you can use this. You can see there's a scoring based on the scientific research in terms of what you can score each one of these out. So the important thing when you use this diagnostic is to say contextualize it around a change project and do it before the project, maybe even during the project, just to see where you've got big gaps. The key here is not to be over optimistic, and if you don't know, score low. So if you don't assume that everyone knows the need for change and then score yourself high. If you don't know if everybody understands the need for change, then you need to score yourself low and go and find out. So they're the key things to remember when you use this diagnostic. And then just finally on this, I've just again just shared our what we call our change success formula. So just following this, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones most responsive to change. Famous Charles Darwin quote. I think that's probably truer now than ever. To get change success, you need to check a proven change model, which you now have. So recommend you use that. But then obviously you also need excellent implementation. So getting back to strategy, your vision and your plan, not just strategically, but for this project that you're thinking of, having a process in your business that you follow for change, having the right levels of leadership, having the right team, because often it's a team that is needed to deliver these things, and monitoring and auditing yourself along the way. So I think if you can cover those things off with the change model, then you'll get really good outcomes around change success. And then just as a final tool for you really, on our sister company website, salesshift.com, sales-shift.com, under the resources, we have some free diagnostics. So this change success diagnostic is in there as an electronic diagnostic, which is a bit more detailed than the one I've given you here. Great to go in there. It only takes 5, 6, 7 minutes just to plug in and answer some questions around the project you're thinking about, to give you a really detailed report on your chances of success and what you might need to do to turn that around. We've also done some work on our personal change diagnostic, because although the core elements for personal change are the same as organizational change, the levers on the outside are slightly different. So we've built that model, and again, that diagnostic is available for you if you want to do a diagnostic on personal change, either for yourself or somebody in your team. Okay, so now just to think about what we do next. We're at the end of this program now, so I just wanted a couple of things to leave you with as we end the program. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is just this notion of having a growth mindset, which I think is going to be really critical as we move through the coming months. This is a piece of work done by Carol Dweck. She wrote a great book called Mindset, which if you like to read, I'd recommend. I believe it's Bill Gates' favorite book now. But Carol's work started with children, where she was trying to understand whether the notion of a fixed or growth mindset affected ultimate performance of children. And she saw, some really intelligent children, but they started to develop a fixed mindset driven by this kind of notion that they needed to look smart because they were told they were smart. But they started to avoid challenges as a consequence, as opposed to other kids that weren't necessarily as smart, but had a mindset where if we can keep learning and embracing challenges, then we can continually learn and grow. And in almost every instance, more intelligent kids with a fixed mindset were massively overtaken by less intelligent kids with a growth mindset by the time they were 16. So an incredible piece of work, but this work has been evolved hugely since the book into adulthood, and it showed that you can work on your mindset, right through your life. So I'll just share with you just one piece from the book that I think is kind of worth just reflecting on as we move through the coming weeks. So just a bit of a checklist really in terms of where are you in your mindset? Do you believe that skills are something you're born with, so they're fixed, as opposed to coming from hard work and that can always be improved? Do you believe challenges should be avoided because I don't want to reveal a lack of skill, and so as a consequence I give up easily? Or should these be embraced as an opportunity to grow and need to be more persistent? And then on from that, if effort is essential because that's as a path to mastery as opposed to being unnecessary because you only put effort in if you're not good enough. And I think where many people fall back, even if they're very green, is on the feedback. Do you get defensive and take it personally, or do you see it as useful, so to learn from and help you to improve going forward, and even actively, seek out from people that will be honest with you as opposed to just tell you what you want to hear. And then finally, with setbacks, are you blaming others and getting discouraged, or are you using this as a wake-up call to work harder next time and to learn from those setbacks? So I think really worth reflecting on that mindset and the mindset of the people around you. I just think finally on what next. I think as we've alluded to already, we are going to continue this program out with the second series that will start at the beginning of June, which we're calling Protecting Your Future. Again, we'll centre that around 3 webinars. The first one around getting productive, the second one about leveraging your brand, which there's I think a misunderstood how brand can really help you grow, but also increase your profits as well. We're going to bring in a brand strategist as a guest speaker for that session, and then we'll finish off the webinar series with this how to sustain your growth, not just grow in the short term. And again, as with this program, we'll make sure you're tied up with a coach for those that want some feedback and support through the program. And we've also managed to get an extension on the online courses to the 15th of June, so we can continue to offer those out for those that want to do some added learning. As I said, also what we're also going to do is through WI's launch some new director circles, probably a senior leaders group, which is a kind of classic director circle with around about 15 members. Typically, they're £5 million plus directors, £5 million businesses, directors of those kind of businesses, or 25 employees plus. But we're also, I think, going to start a director circle around what we call a growth club, which is maybe for those smaller businesses, more kind of owner managed maybe, or kind of one-man bands where it's all about kind of growth and more early stage business challenges. So hopefully a couple of options there that will fit most people's requirements. And then probably the last thing is just to say, WR Partners, which you'll probably notice actually is a rebrand. That's been happening in the background for a few months, been held back from the market, I think, because of COVID. But I think the important thing here is that there's some great new accountancy products from WR, and a full advisory suite that will make you fully aware of over the coming days and weeks. Much of which has already been there, I think, but maybe we've not been good enough at just kind of letting you know what's available to continue to support you. So we'll get some comms out on all those 3 areas that will help those of you that want to continue the journey. Okay, so I think just in summary, in terms of this Thrive session, the message really is, try and get back to strategy as quickly as possible, and try and integrate what you're doing into your overarching strategy. Make sure you focus first on your direction, and then make sure if you're into things like SWOTs that they are strategic. Secondly, proactively manage the change. Try and apply that transformational leadership, or find it from around you, and use that change success model because it is proven. And I think just finally develop your growth mindset. This is obviously a recording because we lost the live recording from the session. So obviously there won't be any questions here. What we will just add though is, as we said in the live session, for added learning, the 2 free courses are available. So reach out to your coach or to me directly if you want access to those. Your support coach, as I said, is here for you, as am I. And these materials, obviously like this recording and the handouts are available on the portal, so you can spend a bit of time reflecting. And if there's any questions in the future, just let us know. So thank you for listening again. If you're now listening again, as I said, any questions, anything you need from these sessions, just reach out, and we'll be happy to help. Thank you.